Hey watch friends, today we're going to check out the latest offering from Zelos. This is their Thresher Worldtimer. This one's launching on their website on August 14th of 2024, and I'll of course have a link down the video description. In case you missed it, already featured an unboxing of this one. Encourage you to go back and check that out. They always have excellent packaging, especially if you're not familiar with those. In case you saw that banner at the top, they did send this one in and I don't have to send it back, so I always of course want to be upfront about that. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and dive straight into this and see what this model's like. First, for the basic specs, this comes standard with a 1-year warranty. The case on my calipers, measured from the 3 o'clock to 9 o'clock position, is coming in at 40.8 millimeters. The bezel steps down pretty significantly and is coming in dead on at 39 millimeters. The lugs are a strap change friendly 20 millimeters. The lug to lug is a pretty versatile 47 millimeters. The total thickness is coming in at 12.7 millimeters, and that is inclusive of this flat sapphire crystal, which does feature inner AR coating, but we'll check that out further. They also mentioned, though, that this is coming in at 11.5 millimeters without the crystal. The reason why that's important is I don't think that it wears as thick as almost 13 millimeters would denote, and that's especially true when you factor this case shape, but we'll check that out as we go through. This really just kind of melts into the wrist, so I think it wears quite nicely in that regard. As already mentioned, flat sapphire crystal, it does have a box edge for that, which does add to the height, and again, inner AR coating, though not too much of it, because you do want some light to come in, especially on this mother of pearl, and we'll talk about that as we go through, because it has a lot of range. The movement is a Miyota 9075. For those who aren't familiar, it's of course the excellent Miyota 9 series movement. That is their newer GMT. So that is an automatic movement. It's going to be similar to the other 9 series. Automatic, it does have hacking as well as hand winding. It is higher beat at 28,800 beats per hour, has around a 42-hour power reserve. But the big thing that adds, as I mentioned, this is not only their GMT offering, but this is actually what they would call like their Traveler GMT, or many people refer to it as a true GMT as well. So that will actually jump with your hour hand there instead of the GMT function, which I know many like. As far as the water resistance, this comes with 200 meters or 20 atmospheres of water resistance. So despite the fact that this is more of a military style than a dive style, that actually still has plenty respectable, even dive rated level for water resistance. The weight is only coming in surprisingly at 115.9 grams, size to my 6.5 inch wrist on this included bracelet. The reason for that being this one's titanium, and we'll explore that as we go through. So now that we have the basic specs out of the way, let's go ahead and dive deeper and get a better feel for what this one's like to live with before we wrap things up. First, for the colors. This is available in 6 different versions. There's of course the double mother of pearl that we're looking at today, which has mother of pearl for both the dial as well as the bezel insert. There's also 3 enamel versions. There's a burgundy, a chalk gray, and we'll check out a chalk gray hammerhead 3 as well. There's also a dusk version, which is a black. Then there's a double aventurine, so that's an aventurine dial with an aventurine bezel as well. That's something they've done before, but that is a first for the brand as far as in the industry. And then additionally, there's a special edition version that is a Damascus case. That's the only one that's not going to be titanium construction, so that is stainless steel Damascus for the case as well as the bracelet and all the accents there. We'll most explore this particular one since that's the one we have here today. As far as the color range on this, one of the things that you're going to notice with this mother of pearl is it's really hard to pin down what color it actually is. And the reason for that being, sometimes it will look almost a completely navy blue. It gets a very dark saturated coloration, and at certain angles it can almost look like a solid colored dial. But at the same time, when you turn it to other angles, it gets a really light sky, almost like pastel blue coloration for it as well. But then additionally, what you're going to get is you get that typical pearlescent effect. So as the light hits it, you can go, if it's a more direct lighting on there, it might just look like a milky white, where it kind of looks like a sky with has that little bit of blue tinge, but then has that like milky creaminess going across. Or alternatively, when you get it at the right angles, it actually really wants to come to life, and you'll especially see it even throughout this indoor footage where you can get just pops of all kinds of aurora effect, where you get those fuchsias, you get a light like tealish blue, you get a brighter, more vibrant blue, you get all the different colors of the spectrum through this, and it's really just quite gorgeous to look at. And you get that not only from the dial but also from the bezel as well, which is just fantastic. One of the things that I really like is that mother of pearl almost gives like a holographic effect to it. If you've ever seen those holograms where you can kind of move them around and you get that visual 3D effect for it as the light hits it, I kind of get that sense in essence with this. And that's actually compounded by the Lumicast, which gives a 3D effect, and we'll check that out further. As far as the dial layout, this one only features the applied logo at the 12 o'clock position. You'll notice that there is no text at the 6 o'clock, which I think is very welcome, especially on this particular version, because you really want that dial to be able to shine through without any distractions there. So I appreciate that. As you move out towards the perimeter, before you hit the chapter ring, you will notice that there are hashes all the way around. You do have more bold at your 5-minute increments, but then you have your precision legibility with your individual hashes in between there with nice thin, but still very distinguishable as well. As you move farther out, as mentioned, you do have your chapter ring there, and with this, consistent with the overall layout for the watch, that is a GMT. So with that layout, you notice that this one has the color complement of yellow at the top and then white at the bottom, and we'll revisit that because there's a significant implication that comes with it. But overall, the aesthetic I do like, and I think it complements it well. Shifting over to the 6 o'clock position, you can see that this one does have a date window, and of course that does mean that you lose the numeral at 6, and I went ahead and put this on the date for 6 just to give you that effect there. But that date window, as you can see, it is just going to be a standard white date wheel. You know, that's usually not something that I prefer, and that's no different here as far as I do think white just tends to look a little cheap since that's usually the stock kind of option. But then looking at that next to the lower portion of the chapter ring, with that having a white there, I do think it ties in well, and I'm really not certain what they could change that over to just because this does color shift so much. So I don't know if a light blue would work or maybe a yellow, but that'd probably be too bold and too much there. So I don't know. Let me know what you think on that one. Shifting over to the hardware, this has what I would describe as a polished, skeletonized paddle type handset for both your hour and your minute hand. As far as the second hand, that's going to be polished as well. This one, unlike many other models, does not have a color accent or pop on the second hand. They reserve that for the GMT, but it does have a pill-style lollipop out towards the tip. As far as the GMT hand, as I already alluded to, that matches with your chapter ring, and it does have a yellow accent for the arrow out at the tip, making that very legible. So it's fairly bold in terms of sizing, though I think well proportioned, but also the color pop is nice also. As I mentioned we would revisit, this does feature for the first time ever for the brand, they used, instead of having applied indexes, they actually went with Lumicast. So while those two are going to be applied, that is actually a block of loom, and that's part of what gives this really neat effect that you'll see from the varied angles. And what that does is it really actually kind of immerses you in a 3D effect for the numerals, which I think especially in this numeral form is such a cool accent and touch. But in particular, as I already mentioned earlier, I think it works so well on this mother of pearl. Not just do I think the colors complement each other well, but also though just that effect of kind of that hologram effect or holographic effect that you get from the dial, but then also having that 3D pop from the Lumicast, I think that works quite nicely. Really like that a lot. I think it's a cool effect. As far as the loom itself, you know, every Zelos that we've experienced has really had strong loom performance overall. Even the Nova, despite the fact that it had almost no loom applied on the original Nova, it still actually performed surprisingly well for the limited area it had. So one of the things that this Lumicast was incorporated to do was to kick it up a notch. And I've got to say, because the Zelos performance was so good in the past, I can't say I'm blown away that this is just like incredible for it, because it's always been good, but it really does live up to expectations in terms of loom performance, as well as just overall brightness and that cool effect that you get from it. So across the board, I think this works well here, but don't expect, if you're familiar with Zelos models, that they're going to be able to completely transcend for this just because it is already started from such a high baseline to begin with, but it really is quite good though. As far as the loom, you have it applied to the markers, of course the hands as well, and then you actually have, as you've seen through the chapter ring. But one of the things you might have noticed is both the chapter ring and the bezel, while they do have loom applied, the particularly yellow and then the bezel are going to fade fairly quickly relative to everything else. So what ends up happening there is with that yellow portion, you actually have the nighttime hours, so the hours where you're most going to be in the dark, those actually fade the quickest, so you can't really use that, but then the bottom, which is your daytime hours, that glows brightly. So I do think as far as the color aesthetic, I think it works well for the daytime layout of this. However, the nighttime effect, it's a little bit counterintuitive for that, but the reality is I think that's more of an accent anyways, and the bottom line is you're primarily going to be using this for your markers as well as your hands, both of which perform quite well, so no complaints there whatsoever. As far as the bezel on this, with being a Worldtimer style bezel, it does of course have the world layout as you go through there. So what this is going to be is this is a 48 click bi-directional bezel. As far as the finishing on this, this is a wide gear cut and it's going to be brushed for the overall finishing. As far as the insert on this particular one, as we've already discussed, this is a mother of pearl insert in the bezel as well. It does have an enamel coating over the top, and that's going to be true for the aventurine version, which has the aventurine bezel. It also has enamel on the top. That means it's going to be more prone to scratches. I haven't had any issues, but if you do, you can actually buff those out as well, so that's a nice plus. The other versions will have a sapphire insert for that, so they do change it up. As far as the action, let's go ahead and listen to that. As we did in the unboxing as well, the bezel action on this I think is really quite well dialed in. It's not always easy to dial in a bidirectional bezel. In this one, it's fairly light, but not too light. It has almost no play in either direction. I mean, it just locks in dead on. So it's very easy to manipulate, very easy to grip a hold of despite being set back. No complaints there. Very, very well done on this as far as the bezel action. And then as far as that mother of pearl, you really do get that nice pop as you move it around, and we'll check that out as we go across the footage. Shifting over to the case on this is titanium, as I already mentioned. This, though, does have 1200 Vickers of scratch resistance coating applied to the case as well as the bracelet and everywhere else, so that's going to help to keep this looking new longer. One of the things with this, with going with titanium, it allowed them to incorporate the brushing on the side, but then they also worked in that blast, which I think looks really good on titanium because it gets some of that kind of like gunmetal hue to it. So I really think that that nicely played with the lines and is good textural play as a whole. One of the things that you're going to notice here is the silhouette of this. So for this, many of you might have already observed the fact that this really shares a lot of similarities to the hammerhead as far as the cut lines. And we'll actually bring in the hammerhead next to it so you can check that out. But it also, the profile-wise, to me is less like the hammerhead and more so like the black tip. So I think that's kind of neat in that it really does melt into your wrist with that downturn and that smooth flow, just like the black tip does. But it has a really scaled down form of the hammerhead. So you get kind of the lines and aesthetic of the hammerhead with the wear characteristics of the black tip, and I think that's excellent. The downturn itself does come just a little bit proud of the case back, which that's very welcome. In between the lugs, as we looked at in the unboxing, you can see that similar to the Mako, this has kind of a reverse curvature to that. So it's relatively straight, but it does have a reverse curve. So that should work nicely with straps as well. We'll talk about further that this does have some interesting lug cuts, or some end link cuts rather, to incorporate with the lugs. And you can see at the top of the lugs, they changed up the texture there as well. So you get that brushing and that kind of flat area. So it really just gives a lot of visual interest all over the place. On the 4 o'clock side, you can see that this does have the crown, or rather at 3 o'clock side, it does have the crown at the 4 o'clock location. Unlike the Mako, it doesn't really have a crown guard built into it, so I would say it doesn't have a crown guard, where that one has kind of like a flow down that partially blocks. Shifting over to the crown itself is coming in at 6.9 millimeters. Similar to the bezel, this does have a scaled down version of that gear cut, and again, it is going to carry over primarily with brushing, but it does have some blasting accents as well. This is screw in for that, as you'd expect, for the 200 meters of water resistance, and then it is signed on the outside as well. Real nice deep ball milling into that, so that's a nice touch there. Shifting over to the caseback on this is a screw-in construction. The finishing is going to be brushing, and it's going to be a circular brushing all the way around. It just has your simple text going through, and you can see this particular variant. There are 300 listed, because I know many people want to know how many of each version are available. This does, despite the fact that this has a Miyota movement, ordinarily they would go with solid casebacks, or have for a while, at least with their Japanese movements, gone with solid casebacks. This one does actually have an exhibition window. And then on the inside, you can see that that does have a nice black custom rotor, which has a map etched into that, or milled into that. So that's a cool touch there as well. Shifting over to the bracelet. As you can see, this fits nicely on my 6.5-inch wrist. Part of that is owing to the fact that this does have relatively short lug to lug, but then again, it does have only 20 millimeter lug, so a little smaller than you might expect for 41, though that's right on the line. It tapers down to 18 millimeters at the clasp, so a nice gradual taper all the way through. As far as the finishing, this is actually a faint brushing, despite the fact that oftentimes in many lights and angles, it looks kind of like it itself is a blasted, though it does get a little more of a light play, but it's very faint brushing running the length of it. It does also, though, have polished chamfers on the edge, and that gives just a little bit of visual appeal and kind of classes that up a bit. The construction, it does have female end links, and as we already saw, the end link itself is very customized there, but then you've got a female coupler, and then that transitions down to H links. The H links are nice and short. They do have quick release spring bars on the back, so if you want to change that out, no problem in doing so. Additionally, it is held in with screws, and if you don't already have one, I'll have an Amazon affiliate link down in the description. Has a good quality screwdriver there. Highly recommend picking one up. And if you pick up anything else as well, it doesn't even have to be that screwdriver. It does help out the channel, and it's greatly appreciated. Of course, it doesn't cost you anything. As far as the articulation on this, because of the short H links, as is oftentimes the case here, because this is such light titanium and has such short H links, great articulation, great drape, no problems with comfort whatsoever. So really quite pleased with that. Can't complain there. As far as the articulation, it does stop short. So despite the fact that this has female end links, you'll notice that this does hit on the quick release spring bar, so it can't fully articulate over. But I haven't had any issues with comfort from that. As far as the clasp, this we've seen in the past on Aurora and otherwise. This is their standard double pusher fold over type clasp. It has brushing as your primary finish, though it does have blasting. It is signed in the middle. When you open it up, it does have a milled bridge. And then most importantly, it has toeless micro adjust, so you can just very easily push that little button in there. You can slide that out. Yes, it does extend where it does not replicate the bracelet style. It replicates more or less the clasp as far as with that extension, which I know not everybody is crazy about, but I think it works well. This is not ratcheting, so you will have to push that button to go in or out with that. But again, this is one that I've been fond of in the past, and that's the same thing here. Alright, so now that we have all that out of the way, we should hopefully have a better feel for what this is like to live with, but let's go ahead and bring in some comps to get a better idea of sizing and some comparisons I've made. So first, here it is next to the chalk gray or chalk blue Hammerhead 3 titanium. So first off, I want to bring this in because this is one of the colorways that's available, or at least a similar version of having a chalk enamel, so that gives you an idea there. Additionally though, you can see where this has a somewhat similar silhouette to the Hammerhead. So this one's a 44, I believe, 44 or 43 for that, versus this one around 41. But then checking out the side, you can see what I'm talking about as far as just kind of those edge cuts and just the way that cuts in there. A lot of similar angles to that. But bringing in next, this is the black tip GMT, which this is a thicker version of the black tip, but it still will give you an idea. So first, this is 41 millimeters. So you can see this one, I really think actually scales down as far as the perception, partly because of the chapter ring and otherwise, but also with the setback. And in that sense, I think it's similar to the Hammerhead, where despite the large size, it has a relatively small dial by comparison. The same thing with this black tip. If you look at the profile, see what I'm talking about as far as the flow down at the bottom? I really think this has kind of that melding construction. The original black tip had a thinner case back, so that nested better into your wrist, but you can get an idea there as to what I'm talking about and why I draw those comparisons. Next, here it is next to a 40 millimeter. This is Mako in a similar colorway as far as the blue and yellow, and this one's been customized with the stainless bezel, but that gives you an idea as far as sizing. I think this is more consistent with a 40 than it is a 41 to my eye at least. And then finally, bringing even smaller, here it is next to the Batavi Geograph, and this is a 39 millimeter, but you can see this is a Worldtimer, and this is, whereas this one is a Worldtimer bezel, this one's more of a true Worldtimer in that disc rotates, so the cities will actually stay stationary. These cities you have to rotate as you go through, so it's more or less a converter, so think of this as being a bezel Worldtimer and more a true GMT with a bezel that is a Worldtimer for that. So that gives you an idea as far as the overall sizing and hopefully to help get an idea of the scale. So let's go ahead and wrap things up with my personal view of the positives and critiques, because this one's not perfect. There are some things that I would like to see changed, as well as the summary. First, for the positives, the value on this, as always with Zelos, I think it's excellent. These start at $629 at launch pricing. That's going to be for your enamel versions. This mother of pearl as well as the aventurine are $649, which for titanium, double mother of pearl or aventurine, the hardened coating, the tooless micro adjust, all that stuff, I think you get a lot for your money. And then that special edition Damascus, that's coming in at $849. Again, full Damascus everywhere. Can't really complain there either. So I think that's a solid deal. The dial as well as the bezel on this, I think, are absolutely gorgeous. I love the color pops that you get with that fuchsia and everything else going on, so no complaints there. I think the layout is great. I love the color accents of the yellow. I think was well chosen to give you like a warm, beachy vibe. Across the board, just really good. This thing is very thin, despite what the specs might tell you. The case itself is extremely thin. The bezel is a little bit thicker, but really that it's just thick enough to give you easy purchase and grip. And then the case back isn't too thick there, and it's well tucked. So what ends up happening on the wrist, I think it wears much thinner than you might think when you hear, 11.5 or even the 12.7 there. So either way, no matter whether you're including the crystal or not, it wears, I think, thinner than you might otherwise expect. And then it is just so comfortable. Good articulation, very lightweight, great comfort, can't complain there. And then, of course, on-the-fly adjustment with the Toeless Micro. That's always excellent. The Lumicast, again, as I mentioned, on this particular version at least, I like it a lot. I think that 3D effect against that mother of pearl dial, I think really just works. The loom performance is good. I think it's a cool look across the board. And then sizing, I think this is a pretty versatile sizing, kind of like the Hammerhead, where I understand that's too big for many. This one, with being 41 millimeters, I think for larger wristed folks, you're going to have enough from the case presence and otherwise that's still going to fill up your wrist and you're going to be plenty satisfied with it. But for smaller wristed folks like myself, and even a little smaller than my 6.5-inch wrist, I still think that this is plenty wearable as far as the compact form factor, the smaller dial, all those kind of things, and you've got plenty of lure and pop to keep you interested. But what about the critiques? There's just a few minor things that I wish that they would have changed. First is the minute hand. As you can see there, I wish they would have gone just a little bit longer. It didn't need to come much longer. I would have still wanted to see the hashes, but I'd like that to at least touch the hashes, or possibly even go a little bit past the start of the hashes, but still having visibility there. So that's just an item that I would like to see cleaned up. Additionally, the end links, I said that we would revisit this. You can see that that's kind of cut in, which is visually interesting, and that is intentional. It's deliberate. It is fitted for that, but it kind of cuts and drops down in. The part that I'm not real crazy about is if you look here with the end link interface with the actual lug, you can see that you just get a little bit of a lip over. It's not perfectly contoured. I wish that would have flowed perfectly and not had that little ledge. I do think that cheapens the look just a little bit, but it otherwise is really good in that regard, and I think it's a cool aesthetic. And then finally, the crown size. For me, I wish that they would have gone just a little bit smaller. You don't need any issue or no issues with the 4 o'clock crown and that pattern and everything. Very easy to grip a hold of, but I do just think the crown's just a little bit too big. Maybe drop that down from 6.9 to like 6.3 or 6 for that. I think it would have just been a little more proportionate to the case looking from the profile as well as from the aerial. Maybe even tuck that in just a little bit. But like I said, very minor items. So where does that leave us? At the end of the day, this one may only be a Thresher in name because the aesthetic is so different from the other ones, and I think it more borrows completely new model and then more borrows case from the Hammerhead and Blacktip. But despite that, it's another great original design and offering that is a solid value, good aesthetics, and I really think is going to be tough to beat. So there you have it. I hope this has been enjoyable for you. If you did like it, please do tap that like button. If you haven't already done so, smash that subscribe button and drop a comment. Let me know what you think. Do you like the model? What do you think of the style? What's your favorite colorway? All that kind of good stuff. Thanks for watching.